The question, though, is which school's best suited for your child, and how do you determine that? Well, there's been a great deal of research done on that recently, and certainly the New Zealand Initiative has been leading that, and particularly the writer on this issue is Dr. Michael Johnston. He joins us now. Michael, thank you for joining us. How your children have passed through secondary school already, or are they still there?
No. In fact, both daughters are still in primary school. I've got an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old. Just to clarify, Michael, the research I did on this was a few years ago, and it was for the Association of Boys' Schools. It wasn't actually for the initiative.
Oh, okay, all right. But nonetheless, one would anticipate that you're not influenced by anything other than fact.
That is correct. I analysed all the NCEA data, and the data very much spoke for themselves. Okay, well then,
tell me, what are the general conclusions that you reach from analysing that data?
Well, so what I did was to compare NCEA achievement between boys in co-ed schools and boys in boys' schools, and I did that ethnicity by ethnicity, decile by decile, so that takes out of the comparison the variability that's inherent in those other variables. And what I found was that for every decile level and every ethnicity, boys in boys' schools were performing better on average than those in co-ed schools. And not only that, they were undertaking more rigorous assessment for NCEA. In other words, they did a higher proportion of their assessment through external assessment rather than internal assessment. And when we look at the NCEA data in general, we see it's tougher to get the credits in the external assessment. So it was pretty clear. And in fact, the differences, some of the largest differences were for Māori and Pacifica boys at low decile schools. So it's not an elitist phenomenon.
Okay, all right. Well, that's important information to know. In that respect then, there has been also a view, though, that girls do better in girls' schools. Is that a general observation that's factual as well?
The last time I looked at those data was about 20 years ago, and it was the case, and I can't see any reason why it would have changed. So this was a report I wrote about 20 years ago, where I did a bunch of analyses on both boys and girls' schools, and for both sexes, the pattern was similar. The single-sex schools would, on average, doing better.
Okay, then take me to the next bit of this and that's the obvious. Why? Why would that be?
Therein lies the rub. The data tell us the what, but they don't tell us the why. So
you must have come to some conclusion. So. Yeah, well, you could. Well, that's why you're on the show, Michael.
I avoided coming to some conclusions on that because I didn't have any evidence, but I'm willing to speculate.
Go. Listen, we wouldn't have invited you on unless you're a speculator.
I do know of some other research which is quite interesting in this regard. This is international research that shows that actually there's no difference between male and female teachers in terms of how they perform with either boys or girls. So it's not the case, for example, that women are better at teaching girls and men are better at teaching the boys. There are some same-sex biases built into grading sometimes, and it's also true that boys get academic consequences in terms of their grades for their less than decorous behaviour. So in other words, if they misbehave, they're more likely to be graded more harshly if the teacher knows who they're grading. And we can see that when anonymous grading is compared with non-anonymous grading. But it's not the case that women are any less able to teach boys than men are or anything like that. But what I do suspect, and this is just a speculation, is that when we consider that 85% of our primary school teachers and about 70% of our secondary school teachers are women, that this might affect the culture in our schools to a degree in a way that makes them just have more values and modes of behaviour that are consistent on average with girls than with boys. That's my best guess. But also perhaps there's something to do with a kind of camaraderie that you get at a boys' school or a girls' school that might not be quite the same at a co-ed school. But you know what, having said all of that, yeah. I'm not saying that everybody should send their kid to a single-sex school. Let me be really clear about that, because there are a bunch of other things that you need to take into account. You know, for example, my own daughter, who's 11 at the moment, we're going to send her to a co-ed school because she likes being around boys. She wouldn't like it at a girls' school. So you've got to take that into account. And not only that, there's big variation within boys' schools, girls' schools, co-ed schools in terms of the quality. So it might be that on average we've got this difference, but individual schools can buck that trend. And you might have a great co-ed school down the road, and the single-sex school might not be so flash. So there's so much to it.
Just the concept, I've railed against this for as long as I've been in public life, the feminisation of New Zealand schools, and particularly at primary school level. I cannot understand why we are not talking about institutional sexism here, given the vast majority of school teachers. I understand it's higher than 85%, for example, at primary school, Michael.
It's about 85, I think. In early childhood, it's almost 100%, but I think
that's right.
I could have that wrong. I think it's about 85.
And that's just wrong. Certainly when I went to primary school, and perhaps by the sounds of things, I'm a little bit older than you, primary schools were roughly 50-50 in terms of male and female teachers. Men have dropped out of that profession at an alarming rate, and now would appear to be dropping out of our secondary profession as well. And I guess there's a reason, though. And there's the next question for you. So at a boys' school, if I'm a male teacher, would I find the staff room a less forbidding place?
I mean, that's possible. I don't actually know what the breakdown of male to female is in say, boys' schools in terms of teachers, whether I'm fairly sure it would be true that there would be a higher proportion of male teachers in single-sex boys' schools than there would in co-eds, but I don't have those data to hand. But look, I mean, you raise a really good point about the issue with boys' education in general. And setting aside for a moment the teacher ratios in terms of male to female, there's just no policy attention on the fact that boys are not doing as well as girls in our education system. You know, you can look at the UE data, which are a really good measure of relative performance, because it's a well-defined set of standards for NCEA that you have to do to get UE, so it's not as subject to the kind of movable feast that is levels 1 to 3 NCEA. And girls achieve UE at about 10 to 12 percentage points higher every year. And consequently at university, close to 2/3 of degrees go to young women, and only a third or so to young men. Now, this doesn't seem to attract any policy attention.
Agreed.
And a component of that may well be to look at teacher ratios male to female and see what we can do to attract more men to the profession and identify the factors that are inhibiting them from going into teaching. And I do think that it can become a bit of a vicious spiral, because as there are fewer and fewer men in teaching, perhaps they're less and less attracted to it because the culture is more and more kind of feminized. So I think that it is a real issue, and it isn't something that anyone in policy circles is paying much attention to.